The city had rules it never printed, rules passed mouth to mouth in low voices and cautious glances. One of them was whispered more than any other: never cross Madame Elena Morty. People said her name the way they said storms or funerals, quietly, with respect, with fear. Madame Elena Morty was not just the widow of a legendary New York crime boss. She was the spine that held the family upright after his death. While others fought for territory with noise and blood, she ruled with memory and consequence. Favors owed to her stretched back decades. Enemies learned that time did not soften her, it sharpened her. Yet on this particular morning, she moved through the city like any other aging woman. No motorcade, no spectacle, just a black sedan sliding through midtown traffic, windows cracked to let the spring air in. She sat upright in the back seat, gloved hands folded neatly in her lap, dark glasses hiding eyes that had seen too much to ever fully rest. Once a month, without fail, she visited her husband's memorial. Not a grand grave, not a public monument. A quiet stone tucked behind an old cathedral, shaded by trees that had grown taller since he was buried. It was the only place she allowed herself to be just a woman who had lost someone, instead of a symbol others feared. She stood before the stone in silence, her posture immaculate, her face unreadable. She did not cry. She had cried enough years ago to last a lifetime. Instead, she spoke softly, telling him the city was still standing, the family still breathing. Telling him she had kept her promise. Loneliness lived there, deep in her chest, but it never showed on her face. Loneliness was a weakness others tried to exploit. She did not give them that satisfaction. Across the city, under buzzing fluorescent lights and the constant hiss of a grill, another woman moved through her own routine. Naomi Brooks tied her apron tighter, ignoring the ache in her feet and the knot in her shoulders. She had been on shift since dawn, refilling coffee cups, wiping counters, smiling when customers snapped their fingers instead of saying her name. The diner smelled like grease and burnt toast and exhaustion. Naomi blended into it the way wallpaper blends into a wall. Customers looked through her, not at her. She was young, black, and invisible in a city that only noticed people when they demanded attention. She carried empathy the way others carried bags, heavy but familiar. She remembered regulars' orders. She noticed when someone looked lonely behind their anger. She gave extra fries to the kid whose mom counted coins at the register. No one paid her for that. No one thanked her. It was simply who she was. By noon, her back ached and her smile felt thin. She leaned against the counter for a moment longer than she should have, staring out the front window at the street beyond. Traffic crawled by in fits and starts, horns blaring, tempers flaring. Something in the air felt tight, like the city was holding its breath. She shook it off. New York always felt like that if you thought about it too long. Madame Elena Morty's car rolled toward an intersection that had been under construction for weeks. Barriers narrowed the lanes. Trucks idled on inclines they shouldn't have been on. Her driver stepped out briefly to argue with a traffic officer, leaving her alone for a rare, unguarded moment. She did not notice the truck at first. The sound came before the danger, a horn blaring too long, brakes screaming instead of slowing. Panic rippled through the street in shouts and gasps. Naomi heard it from inside the diner. The sound cut through the clatter of dishes and chatter like a blade. She turned just in time to see people scatter on the sidewalk, faces twisted in alarm. Something was wrong, deeply wrong. Madame Elena turned her head as the shadow fell across her open door. For the first time in years, something like uncertainty flickered through her chest. Two women stood at opposite ends of the city's invisible ladder that day. One with absolute power, one with none at all. One feared by thousands, one ignored by most. Neither of them knew that in a matter of seconds, the line separating their worlds would shatter completely. And somewhere between the scream of metal and the pounding of a frightened heart, fate leaned in and decided it was time. The sound came first, not the crash, not the screams, but a wrong sound, a scream of metal, dragged across the street like an animal in pain. Naomi froze behind the diner counter, coffee pot in her hand, heart skipping for reasons she could not name. Outside the window, people were running, not walking, running, faces twisted in fear. Someone shouted something she could not hear over the rising horn that would not stop. Her body moved before her mind, caught up the coffee pot, hit the counter spilling brown liquid. Everywhere she pushed through the diner door apron, flapping behind her the heat of the street, slammed into her along with dust and noise and chaos. The truck was coming down the slope, too fast, far too fast, its tires screaming smoke, curling from the brakes, the driver pounding the horn like it might undo what was already happening. Madame Alina Morty sat alone in the back of the black sedan, her driver, still outside arguing with a traffic officer. She turned toward the sound too late. The shadow of the truck swallowed the open door of her car in a blink. For the first time in decades, something sharp and cold cut through her chest, not fear exactly, but surprise. She had survived wars, betrayals, funerals. This was not how it was supposed to end, crushed in traffic like an ordinary woman. Naomi saw her then, an older woman frozen in place, eyes wide, hands lifting too slowly. There was no calculation, no thought of consequence, no pause to understand who the woman was or what saving her might cost. Naomi ran. People shouted for her to stop. Someone grabbed at her arm and missed. She felt the heat of the truck, the vibration, through the pavement, the roar filling her ears. She reached the car in a heartbeat, grabbed the woman by the coat, and pulled with everything she had. The impact came at the same time, metal screaming, glass exploding, the world tilting violently. They hit the curb together, hard pain ripping through Naomi's shoulder, her elbow scraping raw against stone. The tray of leftover pies she had been carrying clattered across the ground, food scattering everywhere, ridiculous and unreal against the violence of the moment. The truck slammed into the sedan, folding it like paper. Sparks flew, smoke poured out. The sound was deafening. People screamed again, louder this time. Naomi lay on the pavement, breath knocked from her lungs, heart hammering like it wanted out. She rolled onto her side, panic flooding in, and then she looked at the woman beside her. Madame Alina Morty was alive. Her breathing came fast, uneven, hands trembling as she stared at the ruined car. Inches from where she had been sitting, her body shook, not with weakness, but shock, the kind that seeps in after danger has already passed. Naomi pushed herself up, ignoring the pain in her arm. Her voice came out rough and breathless. "Mom, are you okay?" The woman turned slowly, dark eyes locking onto her, studying her face, as if trying to understand how this reality existed. "You," she said, her voice low and unsteady. "You pulled me out." Naomi nodded, wiping sweat and blood from her brow. "I saw it coming. You didn't move. I just reacted." Sirens wailed in the distance. People crowded closer, phones raised, voices overlapping. But in that small space between them, the world narrowed. Madame Alina looked at the young woman kneeling beside her, apron torn, curls escaping a cheap hair tie, hands shaking from adrenaline. This stranger had thrown herself into death without hesitation. Men in dark suits were already moving toward them, voices, sharp orders flying into phones. Somewhere a black SUV screeched to a halt. Another vehicle pulled in fast and hard. A presence hit the street. Before he spoke, the air seemed to tighten. When Luciano Morty stepped out of the car, his face drained of color, eyes wild as they searched until they found his mother. He reached her in seconds, dropping to his knees, hands gripping her shoulders, checking her breathing, her arms, her face. "Are you hurt? What happened?" She lifted one shaking hand and pointed at Naomi. "She saved me." Luciano turned. Their eyes met, and something shifted in him, something quiet and dangerous. The girl looked small, kneeling there, bleeding, shaking, trying to be brave in a world that suddenly knew his name. "You," he said softly. Naomi blinked. "Me." He looked at her elbow, the blood soaking through fabric. His jaw tightened. "You are hurt." "I am fine," she said quickly. "It's nothing." He reached for her arm without thinking, stopping himself halfway like he remembered. She was a stranger, then gently finished what instinct had started. Sirens grew louder, cameras flashed, the city pressed in, but Luciano only saw one thing. A girl who should not have been there, who should not have mattered, who had changed everything in less than 5 seconds. And standing beside the wreckage, Madame Alina Morty understood something just as clearly. This was not an accident. And the girl on the ground was now part of her fate, whether she wanted it or not. The street changed the moment. He arrived not louder, not quieter, just heavier, like the air itself had been pressed flat by something unseen. People stopped talking without realizing they had stopped. Phones hovered half-raised breaths, held mid-panic, when Luciano Morty stepped fully into the light. He did not shout, he did not run, his power did not come from movement. It came from stillness, from the way the chaos bent around him, without being told to. His eyes found his mother instantly, and for one sharp breath the mask cracked. He dropped to his knees in front of her, hands firm, but careful, checking her shoulders, her arms, her face, as if touching might confirm she was real and not already gone. "Are you hurt?" he asked, voice low, tight, with something close to fear. Madame Alina lifted her chin, pride refusing to let weakness show, but her hand trembled as she reached for his wrist. "I am alive," she said, and then softer than she had spoken in years because of her. Luciano followed her gaze. The waitress was still on the ground, knees scraped, elbow bleeding, curls clinging to her face from sweat and dust. She looked stunned, like someone who had stepped off a moving train and not yet felt the fall. For a moment, Luciano forgot the street, forgot the cameras, forgot the men already spreading out to secure the perimeter. He only saw the girl who had pulled his mother out of death with nothing but instinct. "You," he said quietly. Naomi looked up, startled. "Me." He nodded once, eyes flicking to her injury. "You are bleeding." She pulled her arm back reflexively, embarrassed. "It's nothing, really." It was a small movement, but something in Luciano shifted at the way she tried to disappear, even now after what she had done. People were watching, whispering the name. They recognized the Mafia boss kneeling in the street in front of a diner waitress. One of his men moved forward, and Luciano lifted a hand. Without looking, the man stopped immediately. Luciano reached for her elbow, slowly, deliberately, giving her time to pull away. When she did not, he cleaned the wound with a handkerchief from his pocket, movements precise, unexpectedly gentle. "This might sting," he said. She huffed a weak laugh. "I've burned myself on fryer oil worse than this." His mouth twitched before he could stop it, then his face hardened again. "You should see a doctor," he said. "I really need to go back to work," she replied, glancing toward the diner like it was an anchor, keeping her from floating away. "Work," he repeated, disbelief threading his voice. She shrugged. "Someone has to serve tables." Madame Alina watched the exchange carefully, eyes sharp, missing nothing. She had seen men beg before, she had seen them posture and threaten, but she had never seen her son speak to anyone like this, so quietly, so personally. She rose slowly with help from Luciano's arm, then stepped toward Naomi and studied her face, the youth, the fear, the stubborn dignity. "What is your name?" she asked. "Naomi," swallowed Naomi Brooks. "Are you always this reckless?" Madame Alina asked. Naomi shook her head. "I didn't want you to get hurt." Something softened in the older woman's gaze, just a fraction, enough that Luciano noticed and felt something tighten in his chest. Sirens wailed closer. Now reporters were already pushing against the outer ring, shouting questions, trying to capture faces. Madame Alina turned to her son, her voice firm, controlled. "This girl saved my life." Luciano nodded as if the words carried weight beyond gratitude. "They did." "You are not returning to that diner today," he said calmly. Naomi blinked. "What?" "I will compensate your manager," he continued. She shook her head. "No, sir, I didn't do this for money." He looked at her, then really looked, and something in his chest cracked wider. She was not afraid of him. Not really. She was afraid of what accepting anything from him might mean. Madame Alina stepped closer, placing a hand on Naomi's shoulder. The touch was warm, grounding. "Child," she said quietly, "come with us." Naomi's breath caught. "I can't." "You can," Madame Alina replied, and in her tone was authority tempered by something else, something like care. Luciano opened his mouth to argue, then stopped when his mother glanced at him sharply. The city buzzed around them, but the decision had already been made. Naomi felt it like gravity shifting under her feet. She had stepped out of a diner to help a stranger, and now the most powerful family in the city was closing around her. Behind the cameras, behind the sirens, behind the smoke, one truth settled, heavy and unavoidable. This was only the beginning. The street had gone quiet in a way that felt unnatural, like the city itself was listening. Sirens still wailed somewhere in the distance, but right here, right now, nothing moved, not the crowd, not the guards, not even the... Madame Alina, Morty stood tall despite the pain in her hip, her spine straight, her chin lifted the way it always was when she decided something was final. She turned fully toward Naomi, and the young woman felt every eye on her at once, hundreds of strangers watching, waiting, judging. Naomi shifted on her feet, suddenly aware of how she looked, the torn apron, the blood on her elbow, the grease stain on her shoe. She did not belong in this picture, and everyone could see it. Madame Alina studied her slowly, not like a curiosity, not like a servant, but like someone weighing a truth. "You saved my life," she said, her voice calm, clear, cutting through the noise. Naomi nodded, unsure what else to do. "Yes, Mom." Most people would have screamed Madame Alina, continued, or frozen, or filmed with their phones. "You did none of that." Naomi swallowed. "I just reacted." Madame Alina smiled faintly. "Not kind, not cruel, something deeper. You ran toward death for a stranger," she said softly. "That is not just reaction, that is character." Luciano stiffened beside her, sensing a shift he had felt before in boardrooms, and war rooms, the moment when his mother made a decision no one could undo. "Matter," he started. She raised a hand, and he stopped immediately. Then she did it. She reached out and took Naomi's hands in her own right there in the middle of the street, in front of cameras and enemies, and the entire city. "From today, Madame Alina said, you are my daughter-in-law." The words fell heavy and absolute. The crowd gasped audibly. Someone dropped a phone, another person laughed, thinking it had to be a joke. Naomi's world tilted, her heart slammed so hard, she thought she might faint. She stammered, "I don't understand." Luciano turned sharply. "Matter, what are you saying?" Madame Alina did not look at him. She kept her eyes on Naomi. "Family is not blood alone," she said. "Family is loyalty, courage, sacrifice. This girl gave me all three, without knowing who I was." Naomi shook her head, panicked. "I didn't save you to get married. I didn't even know who you were." Madame Alina squeezed her hands gently, and for the first time her voice softened, truly softened. "And I did not claim you as payment, child. I claimed you because fate placed you in front of me, and I do not ignore fate." Luciano stepped closer, his voice low, urgent. "You cannot just decide this in front of everyone." She turned to him sharply. "You think I do not know where we stand?" she snapped. "You think I do not know what the city will say? Let them talk." Then, quieter for only him to hear, "I saw the way you looked at her." Luciano froze. Because it was true. The second he saw Naomi bleeding on the pavement, something inside him had cracked, something he had buried deep, because it was dangerous. Naomi tried to pull her hands free. "Mom, please. This is too much. I have a job, a family. I am not part of your world." Madame Alina nodded slowly. "I know, and that is why you must be protected." The word landed wrong, cold, heavy. Protected from what? Naomi whispered. "From everything," Madame Alina replied without hesitation. Luciano exhaled sharply. "This is madness." "Madness is ignoring what keeps us alive," Madame Alina shot back. "I watched you lose yourself after your father died. I watched this family harden around you today. Someone reminded me that life can still be chosen." Naomi felt tears burn behind her eyes. She had wanted to help, not to be claimed, not to be pulled into something she did not understand. "I am scared," she admitted quietly. Madame Alina lifted a hand and brushed her cheek with surprising tenderness. "Good," she said. "Fear means you still have something worth protecting." Guards were already moving, closing ranks, reporters shouting questions, but the declaration had been made, and nothing could pull it back now. Luciano looked at Naomi, really looked at her, and saw the terror and the strength tangled together. He did not know what this would cost him, only that his life had just split into before and after. And somewhere deep in the city, something unseen shifted. Because when Madame Alina, Morty claimed someone as family, the world listened. And the enemies began to move. The car did not feel real. Naomi sat in the back seat, hands folded in her lap, staring at leather so smooth. It looked untouched by life. The city outside, the tinted windows blurred into motion lights and buildings sliding past, like she was leaving one world and entering another. Her heart still had not slowed down. Across from her Madame Alina, Morty sat perfectly composed, as if she had not just declared a stranger her daughter-in-law in the middle of the street. Her gaze kept drifting to Naomi, not sharp, not suspicious, but searching as if she were memorizing something precious. Luciano sat beside Naomi, jacket, discarded sleeves, rolled up forearms tense. He had not spoken since they left the crash site, but his presence pressed close, solid, and alert, like a wall that had decided to stand next to her instead of in front of her. "You do not have to stay long," he finally said, voice low. Naomi laughed, once nervously. "Stay where?" "Home," Madame Alina answered smoothly before he could say more. Home, the word echoed wrong in Naomi's chest. She had a home, or at least a small apartment she shared with her brother, and a life built on long shifts and tired smiles. The car climbed away from the city streets, turning onto quieter roads, hedges, rising stone walls appearing like something out of another century. When the gates opened, Naomi's breath caught. This was not a house, this was a world. The estate stretched wide, old trees, framing modern glass and stone lights, glowing softly even in daylight. Men in suits moved with purpose, but without noise, every step deliberate, every glance controlled. Naomi stepped out of the car and instantly felt wrong, like a spilled coffee cup. In a gallery, her sneakers were scuffed, her apron still folded over her arm, elbow bandaged with white gauze that stood out too bright against her skin. Every pair of eyes flicked toward her, then away. Luciano noticed and spoke calmly. "Do not stare, she is a guest." Guest, the word settled heavier than it should have. Inside, the house felt lived and not cold. The floors gleamed, but there were signs of life: an unfinished embroidery hoop on a side table, a folded blanket, slightly askew, an open book face down on a chair. Naomi did not know why, but that made it harder. Madame Alina eased herself down with a sharp inhale. Pain, finally allowed to show just a little. Luciano moved immediately, kneeling in front of her, but she waved him off. "See to her," she said, nodding toward Naomi. "She is hurt." Naomi shook her head quickly. "I am fine, really." Luciano took her arm gently anyway, turning it toward the light. "This may sting." She winced but did not pull away. Hands that had ordered violence now cleaned a scraped elbow with care, and something in Naomi twisted. She had never been handled like this, not gently, not with attention that asked nothing in return. Madame Alina watched them quietly, eyes softening. "Where is your family?" she asked. Naomi hesitated, then answered, "My mom works double shifts. My little brother tries to keep out of trouble. We do our best." "And your father?" "Gone a long time." Madame Alina nodded, understanding flickering in her eyes. "Men leave," she said. "Women remain and hold what is left." Food arrived quickly, too much food, dishes filling the low table, steam rising, smells rich and warm. "Eat," Madame Alina insisted. Naomi obeyed because refusing felt impossible, and because her body finally remembered hunger. Luciano sat across from her, their eyes met briefly, then shifted away, something unspoken stretching between them. Outside the gates, the city kept breathing unaware. Inside the walls, something ancient had begun to move. And Naomi understood one terrifying truth. This place was not just protecting her. It was already changing her. The house did not sleep that night. Naomi felt it even from the guest room tucked deep inside the estate. The silence was two alert footsteps past the hallway, more often than normal. Doors opened and closed with careful restraint. Phones vibrated softly behind walls meant to keep secrets. She lay awake, staring at the ceiling, listening to her own breathing slow, then speed up again every time a sound passed too close. This place was safe, they had told her. But safety had weight, and she could feel it pressing in from every direction. Somewhere beneath the house, Luciano sat at a long table, surrounded by men who had known him since he was young, men who had bled beside him and watched him take his father's place without blinking. A folder lay open in front of him, photos, timelines, traffic patterns. His jaw tightened as he traced a route with his finger. The truck did not fail by chance, he said quietly. One of the men shifted, uncomfortably. Brakes were tampered with, incline chosen, signal timed. Luciano lifted his gaze. Someone knew my mother's schedule. Silence answered him, and silence in that room meant guilt or fear. Above them, Madame Alina stood alone in the courtyard, fingers wrapped tightly around a strand of beads. She only touched when danger circled close. Her eyes stayed, fixed on the ancient tree, its roots thick and unmoving. They think age has softened me, she murmured to the night. She was wrong. Back in the guest room, Naomi finally rose, needing water, needing air, needing something solid. She slipped into the hallway, barefoot, sweater borrowed, and far too big. The house seemed different in the dark shadows, deeper walls taller. She turned a corner and stopped. A man stood near the windows, dressed in a suit, too sharp, eyes too cold. He looked at her like one might look at an object whose value was undecided. "You must be her," he said slowly. Naomi's grip tightened on the glass in her hand. "I am Naomi." The man smiled thinly, the girl who made the young master forget himself. Her pulse jumped. "I don't know what you mean." He stepped closer. "Just a little, be careful," he said. "Not everyone here believes your presence is a blessing." Before fear could fully bloom, a voice cut through the space, sharp and controlled. "Step away from her." Luciano stood at the end of the hall, eyes dark, posture rigid. The air shifted immediately. The man bowed stiffly. "Young master." "Leave," Luciano said. The man did, and did not look back. Naomi exhaled shakily. "Who was that?" "Someone who forgot his place," Luciano replied. "He will not speak to you again." She studied him, noticing the tension in his shoulders, the lines under his eyes. "You haven't slept." "I am working." "On what?" she asked. He hesitated, then said the words that broke the last illusion. "The accident was not an accident." The glass nearly slipped from her hand. "What?" "Someone wanted my mother dead," he said, "and when they failed, they started looking for leverage." Naomi's stomach twisted. "Me?" "Yes." Fear flooded her chest, sharp and suffocating. "They know my face." Luciano stepped closer, his voice softer. "Now they know mine too, and that is why you are here." Outside the courtyard, something small skittered across stone, unseen, a faint metallic click followed by stillness. Madame Alina froze. Guards moved instantly, but not fast enough. Naomi felt it before she saw it, a presence behind her, a hand grabbing her shoulder, a sharp pull, stealing her balance. She gasped as the world tilted. A gunshot cracked the air, loud and final. The grip vanished, the shadow disappeared into hedges, leaving a small black object spinning at her feet. Luciano was there in seconds, pulling her into him, arms tight, breath ragged. "Did he hurt you?" he demanded. "Did he touch you?" She shook violently. "I think he tried to take me." Rage unlike anything she had seen hardened Luciano's face, something ancient and merciless. Madame Alina rushed forward, eyes blazing. "Over my dead body," she hissed. Guards swarmed, radios crackled, alarms whispered instead of screamed. Naomi clutched Luciano's shirt, grounding herself in the only solid thing left. "Why won't they leave me alone?" she whispered. "Because you matter to me," he said before he could stop himself. Silence exploded between them. Madame Alina smiled fiercely. "There it is," she said. The war had found its reason, and it was standing in their arms, shaking but unbroken. Morning came without relief. The sun rose pale and thin over the estate, as if even daylight was unsure it was welcome. Naomi woke to the sound of footsteps outside her door, steady, deliberate. One man, every few feet. Luciano had kept his word. He had not slept. He had not moved far enough to let anything breathe between her and danger. When she opened the door, he straightened instantly, eyes scanning her face before anything else. "Are you hurt?" She shook her head, but the tremor in her hands betrayed her. He noticed, of course. He always noticed now. "Come with me," he said softly. They walked through corridors, still quiet, past walls that held decades of secrets, until they reached the courtyard. The ancient trees stood unmoved, leaves whispering like they knew everything already. Madame Alina was there, beads wrapped tight around her fingers, jaw set, eyes sharp as glass. "They found the tracker," she said, "without greeting. Someone tested our walls." Naomi swallowed, tested like this was a game. Luciano spoke low, but lethal. This was not a warning, it was an invitation. Madame Alina nodded. Once they wanted to see how far they could reach. And now they know, Naomi whispered. Madame Alina turned to her, then really turned the full weight of her attention, settling on the young woman. You are no longer invisible, child, she said gently, and that frightens people who survive by shadows. Naomi hugged herself, suddenly exhausted by fear, by choice, by the feeling that her life had been lifted and set down somewhere unfamiliar. I did not ask for this, she said quietly. No, Madame Alina replied, but you chose to stay after it arrived. Luciano looked at Naomi, his voice rough. You do not have to do this, you can leave today. I will move you somewhere no one will find you. She met his gaze, steady despite the shaking in her chest. And what happens to you? His jaw tightened. That is not your burden. She stepped closer until the guards instinctively looked away, until the space between them felt real and human. You carried this family alone for years, she said softly. Maybe that is the problem. Madame Alina watched them, her expression unreadable, but her grip on the beads loosened. Before Luciano could answer, a sharp voice cut across the courtyard. Young master. One of the men approached, breath quick, tension. Obvious. We found him. The room below smelled of metal and sweat. The man was bound to a chair, blood at his lip, eyes defiant despite the fear trying to claw through. He looked up and smiled thinly, all this over a waitress. Luciano stopped in front of him, posture, calm, eyes empty of mercy. Speak. The man laughed. You are letting emotion rot the structure. She is leverage, and everyone knows it now. Say her name, Luciano said quietly. The man hesitated, then said it. Naomi. Luciano leaned closer, voice barely above a breath. You crossed a line that does not exist for second chances. The man sneered, then cut her loose. Problem solved. The silence that followed was absolute. Luciano straightened slowly. You think caring makes me weak. He turned to the men, watching. You think fear built this family. He faced the traitor again. Men who have nothing to lose burn everything, he said. Men who finally choose something to protect, they end wars. The man paled, realizing too late he had misjudged the future. Take him out, Luciano said. He does not wear our name anymore. The door closed behind the fallen ally like a coffin lid. Upstairs, Naomi stood frozen, having heard enough to understand what she represented. Now not an accident, not a symbol, a line in the sand. Luciano found her in the hall, eyes searching. Did you hear? She nodded slowly. You chose me. No, he said immediately. I chose what I refused to lose. She stepped into his space, heart racing. Then do not shut me out when it gets worse. He closed his eyes briefly, then opened them to her. I do not know how to protect you without changing everything. Then change everything, she said. Outside, the tree rustled, leaves shifting in the morning light. Madame Alina watched from the doorway, a rare smile touching her face. The city had drawn blood, but it had also drawn a vow. And vows were dangerous things. The night pressed in, heavy and restless, like it knew something was breaking apart. Naomi sat alone in the sitting room, knees pulled to her chest, staring at her hands. They were steady now, which somehow frightened her more than the shaking had. She had crossed a line she could not see, and there was no clear way back. The door slid open quietly. Madame Alina stepped inside without ceremony, without guards, without her usual armor. She looked older here, softer, dressed in dark fabric, hair loose around her shoulders. Sit with me, child, she said. Naomi obeyed. For a moment, neither spoke. The house breathed around them, wood settling, distant footsteps, the low hum of power beneath silence. You are afraid, Madame Alina said, not as a question. Naomi nodded. I am afraid of everything. Good, Madame Alina replied. Fear means you still belong to yourself. Naomi frowned. I do not feel like myself anymore. I feel like something everyone is pulling at. Madame Alina studied her closely, then spoke words she had never said out loud to anyone, not even her son. When my husband died, the city expected me to disappear. She said they thought I would break, they waited for it. She inhaled slowly. Instead, I stayed. Because someone had to hold the line, someone had to decide what kind of monsters we would become. Naomi listened, the weight of the confession settling deep. I claimed you that day, Madame Alina continued, not only because you saved me, but because I saw something I have not seen in years. Choice without calculation, courage without hunger. You did not want power, you did not want protection, you wanted someone else to live. Naomi's eyes burned. I never wanted this world. No, Madame Alina agreed, but this world needs people who do not want it. Outside the room, a shadow paused. Luciano stood just beyond the door, listening against his will, every word landing harder than any gunshot. Naomi whispered, I am not strong enough for this. Madame Alina reached out, took her hand's strength is not loud. She said, it is not domination, it is staying when everything inside you wants to run. Naomi swallowed hard. Then why does your son look at me like I am something dangerous? Madame Alina smiled faintly, because you are. Luciano stepped inside, unable to stay away any longer. Mother. She turned to him, eyes sharp. Do not interrupt truth when it finally speaks. He stopped. She rose slowly, facing her son. You think you carry this family alone. She said, you think you must be iron at all times, or everything collapses. Luciano clenched his jaw. Someone has to. No, she snapped, someone has to remember why we survive at all. She gestured to Naomi. You have lived your whole life being unseen, and yet you still choose empathy. He has lived his whole life being feared and forgot how to be human. They stared at each other, the space between them humming. Naomi stood, heart racing. I do not want to be the reason he changes, she said quietly. You already are, Madame Alina replied, and so am I. Luciano finally spoke, voice low. I do not know how to protect you without burning half the city. Naomi met his gaze. Then do not protect me like I am fragile, protect me like I am someone who chose to stay. Something in him broke open, not violently, but completely. He nodded once, then stay with me. He said, not as a command, not as a boss, but as a man asking for something he had never allowed himself to want. She did not answer with words. She stepped closer, close enough to feel his breath, close enough to feel the truth settling between them. Outside, the ancient tree rustled, leaves shifting under the weight of a future changing shape. Madame Alina watched them, knowing this moment mattered more than any war meeting. Because the most dangerous thing in the world was not a gun or a rival. It was a man who finally found something worth becoming better for. The underground room felt colder than usual, even with all the lights on. Naomi did not mean to be there. She had only followed the sound of voices, the low murmur that carried weight through stone and steel. But the moment she realized where she was, it was already too late. The door was not fully closed. She stood still, breath shallow, heart pounding, as Luciano's voice cut through the room, calm and terrifying in its restraint. You went behind my back. A man laughed, sharp and careless, the sound of someone who believed history protected him. You have grown sentimental, young master. Naomi's fingers curled into the fabric of her sweater. Sentimental was not the word she would have used. The man continued, you are letting one girl rewrite rules that kept this family alive for generations. Luciano did not raise his voice, say her name. The man hesitated, then shrugged. Naomi Brooks. The way Luciano moved then was subtle, a shift in posture, a change in air pressure that made even hardened men straighten. You do not speak her name like that, he said. Like what the man scoffed, like what she is, a weakness. Everyone sees it now. Naomi's chest tightened, weakness, the word landed like a blade. Someone else spoke, careful and measured. Enemies will come for her again. They already tried. Removing her removes the problem. The room went silent. Naomi felt dizzy. She had known this world was dangerous, but hearing her own life discussed like strategy stole the breath from her lungs. Luciano stood slowly. You think killing her fixes anything? It fixes everything, the man replied coldly. No witness, no leverage, no crack in your armor. Luciano stepped closer, eyes dark, but clear. You think armor is what keeps us alive? He looked around the room, every face, every memory tied to blood and loyalty. This family survived because it knew when to draw lines, he said quietly, and today I draw one. The man sneered, "You choose her over us." Luciano shook his head. "No, I choose us becoming something better than fear." The man leaned forward. "Then they will come harder, and next time they may not miss." Luciano smiled. "Then not warm, not cruel, resolved, then they will learn what happens when they touch what is mine." Naomi's heart stopped. "What is mine?" The words echoed louder than any gunshot. Guards moved, the man was dragged away, protesting, cursing, promising consequences. Luciano did not look at him again. When the room emptied, Luciano remained standing, hands braced on the table, breathing slow, controlled. Naomi backed away, but the floor creaked, betraying her presence. He turned instantly, eyes finding her in the doorway. "You were listening," he said. "Not on purpose," she whispered. Silence stretched heavy. "You heard enough," he said. She nodded, voice shaking. "They talked about killing me." His jaw tightened. "I would never allow that." "You called me yours," she said quietly. He did not deny it. "Yes." Her heart raced. "Do you mean that, or was it just words?" He stepped toward her, closing the distance, until there was no space left to hide behind meaning. "I mean that you matter to me more than the image I built to survive." She swallowed hard. "I am scared of what loving you costs." "So am I," he admitted. She looked up, meeting his eyes. "Then do not make decisions for me in rooms like this." He held her gaze, then nodded. "I promise." Outside the underground walls, the city kept moving, unaware that something had shifted forever. Because a line had been crossed. And Luciano Morty had chosen love over legacy, which made him more dangerous than he had ever been. The city never learned the full truth, and it never would. New York woke the next morning to rumors and shadows, whispers of a failed hit of men who vanished overnight, of a crime family that had drawn a line so deep no one dared test it again. Inside the estate, the air felt different, not lighter, not safer, but settled, like something had chosen its shape at last. Naomi stood beneath the ancient tree at the center of the courtyard, the same tree that had watched generations rise and fall. Her fingers brushed the bark, grounding herself in something real, something older than fear. She was no longer shaking. That realization frightened her more than the danger ever had. Madame Alina approached without sound, dressed simply, eyes sharp, but warm. "Today you stayed," she said. Naomi nodded. "I almost ran." "But you did not." "Because I wanted to choose," she replied, "not be dragged by fear, not be protected like glass." Madame Alina studied her for a long moment, then reached into her sleeve and drew out a bracelet, gold, worn smooth by years of touch. "This was given to me by my mother-in-law," she said, "the day I decided to stand instead of disappear." She placed it in Naomi's palm, its weight heavier than it looked. "I claimed you once in shock," she continued. "Today I do so with full awareness." Naomi's breath caught. "You do not owe us your life," Madame Alina said, "but if you choose this family, you choose truth, danger, loyalty, and love without apology." Naomi closed her fingers around the bracelet and nodded. "I am still afraid." "Good," Madame Alina replied. "Fear keeps us honest." Luciano watched from the edge of the courtyard, his posture rigid, until Naomi turned toward him, and everything softened at once. He stepped forward, slow, deliberate, not a boss, not a soldier, just a man who had decided to stand where his heart had already gone. "I will not promise you safety," he said quietly. "This world does not offer it." She met his gaze, steady. "I do not want safety, I want honesty." He nodded. "I will not shut you out, even when it is easier to be alone." She stepped closer. "I will not disappear when it gets hard." The city roared beyond the walls, uncaring, but here under the tree, something rare formed. Luciano dropped to one knee, the movement so sudden. Madame Alina gasped, then laughed sharply. "Finally," she said. Naomi froze, heart racing. "I do not want obligation," he said, looking up at her. "I do not want debt or fear or legacy forced on you." He took her hand, his thumb brushing the bracelet. "I want you to choose me, not the power, not the name me." Tears blurred her vision. "You think I have not already?" "Will you stand with me?" he asked, not as a boss, not as an heir, but as a man who had learned too late how to ask. "Yes," she breathed. "Yes, I will." Madame Alina clapped her hands, once sharp, triumphant, The sound echoed through the courtyard. I told you. She said to the sky, I told you fate listens when you act. Guards turned discreetly away, giving them space, dignity, even in a world built on watchfulness. Luciano stood pulling Naomi into his arms, not tight, not desperate, but certain. She rested her head against his chest and felt the steady beat beneath it. She had not planned this life, had not wanted it, had not chased it. But she had chosen it. A waitress who ran toward danger and found a future she never imagined. A mother who found a daughter where she thought she would find death. A man who learned that the most terrifying power was not fear, but love chosen openly. The city would whisper about them for years. But inside the gates, beneath the ancient tree, 3 lives sat down together, not as legend and outsider, but as family. And the world shifted quietly around that truth.